Thank you very much. Please sit. Thank you. This is without question the latest news conference I've ever had.
This was 4 years ago, the morning after Election Day 2020. It was a little after 2 a.m. when then President Donald Trump gave a speech.
And we were getting ready for a big celebration. We were winning everything, and all of a sudden it was just called off.
The election hadn't been called yet, but immediately Trump began suggesting that the results were not accurate.
This is a fraud on the American public. This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election.
He didn't stop there. For months after, Trump waged a campaign against the 2020 results. This included legal battles and lawsuits and culminated in rioters storming the U.S. Capitol. Trump ultimately wasn't successful in overturning the 2020 election, but that hasn't made the issue go away. And the big question in this year's race is how he might handle a potential election loss.
When Trump has been asked about this, he said that he would accept the results with one caveat, as long as the election is free and fair.
If it's a fair and legal and good election, absolutely. If it's going to be a fair and free election, the answer is absolutely I will.
And the implication there is that if he loses, he's going to think the election was not free and fair.
Patrick Marley reports on voting and democracy for The Post. He says that Trump's statements fit into a broader pattern, with many others in the GOP also sowing doubt about the upcoming election. And now, experts are concerned that Trump and his allies might use the same playbook as they did in 2020 to challenge the 2024 election results.
I think the main thing that experts who have looked at this say is that they're certain that Trump will declare victory before the results are known. That's something he did in 2020, and they fully expect him to announce that he has won, whether he's leading or not. And that just sets a bar for others, his supporters, to start questioning results, and it creates a lot of avenues for misinformation before we even know what's happened in the election. The worst case scenario, I think, is political violence, if it were to come to that. You know, there's a lot of opportunities for chaos, confusion, disorder that could spread for weeks as we wait for Congress to finalize the results. I would say that election experts I've talked to are all pretty confident that the right person, the true winner, will be declared the winner and will be sworn into office. But in the meantime, you could have a lot of difficult days.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Elahe Izadi. It's Thursday, October 24th. Today, how Trump could challenge a second election loss. Patrick will break down what we know, including what paths exist for Trump to try to overturn the 2024 election results. Patrick spoke with my co-host, Martine Powers. I'll let her take it from here.
So before we dig into some of the ways that Trump might try to challenge the results of the 2024 election, could you talk a little bit about what is different now versus in 2020? Like if Trump decides to challenge the election results this year, what will be different this time?
The biggest difference this time compared to last is that he's not the incumbent president. So he doesn't control the Department of Justice. Obviously, last time he pressured Mike Pence, his vice president, to try to change the results and reverse the election. He can't do that this time. He just doesn't have the same kind of power that he did 4 years ago. There's also, a lot of things that election officials have learned from last time and steps they've taken to try to counter any kind of efforts to subvert the election. There's new federal law. There are some new state laws to try to ensure that only the correct winner is declared the winner.
So, Patrick, I want to dive into some of the categories of what you've been looking at in your reporting, the ways in which Trump or some of his allies could challenge this election. And I want to start by talking about misinformation, because that's something that could start on election night, like the scenario where Trump or the people around him, that they are saying prematurely, oh, Trump won this election. Talk about misinformation and the potential avenues of what could go wrong there.
Well, first of all, I would say misinformation has already started. Republicans and Trump have been talking for months about the risk of non-citizen voting, which is extremely rare. So we're already seeing sort of the precursors of misinformation. But yes, on election night, that could take off. Trump speaks with the largest microphone, so what he says will be extremely important. And what we've seen on social media platforms compared to 2020 is that there's less oversight from the social media companies to try to tamp down misinformation. So things can really take off even faster than we've seen in the past.
Wow. Okay, so there's misinformation, and then there is the actual counting of votes that is going to be happening in every state. Obviously, as we know, it happens in different ways and along different timelines. But talk to me about how the vote count and the potential for recounts is also an avenue that the Trump campaign could try to take advantage of.
If he loses, he will do everything he can to fight the results in the court of public opinion as well as the actual courts. And so usually the first step to that is a recount. It will differ by state as to how you might approach that. And the recount rules are different from state to state. And so again, anytime you have unknowns, it just raises the opportunity to spread misinformation and create doubts in some voters' minds about the reliability of the election systems that the states use.
Mm-hmm. And my recollection from the last time we did this in 2020 was that specifically when it came to those recounts, that's also when court started to get involved and when you saw lawsuits flying back and forth. Can you talk through a little bit of how the Trump campaign used lawsuits in 2020 and how they might use them again now this year?
Yeah, we saw 6 lawsuits last time. Now, not all of those were from Trump himself. Some of them were from allied groups, challenging or questioning the results or trying to change some rules after he lost that election. And those did not go his way. But it did flood the courts. It did, one of the cases was put before the U.S. Supreme Court as the Texas Attorney General tried to have the votes in other states thrown out. And so, everything we have seen this time suggests we could see an absolute onslaught of litigation after the election. We've already seen dozens and dozens of lawsuits over the way the 2024 election will be conducted, and many of those could be revived after the results are known or start to come in, or new lawsuits could be filed challenging either the results or the way that the election was conducted.
Do you think the legal system is better or worse prepared now to handle that?
I think it's better prepared in that it knows it could be coming. The real challenge for the courts is the incredibly tight timeline we have. The election is November 5th. Congress meets to certify the results on January 6th. So you've got this 2 months where you've got to resolve everything, and many issues have to be resolved well before that January 6th deadline. So that's the challenge for the courts. At the same time, the judges and justices of the state Supreme Courts saw what happened last time. They're prepared for it. In fact, some states like Arizona have had their state Supreme Courts preemptively just tell their courts, you've got to prioritize election litigation. If stuff comes your way, deal with that, take your regular docket and set it aside for the moment. So, as prepared as they can be, I'd say the courts seem to be in that posture right now.
And in terms of either what you've seen start to bubble up so far or from conversations that you've had, is there any particular case or type of case that folks are worried about or that we anticipate could maybe even make its way up to the Supreme Court in the weeks after the election?
I think it's too soon to know. There has been a lot of litigation over the conduct of this election, what types of absentee ballots to cast, who can be on the voter rolls. But the stuff that really matters, who wins and who doesn't, that's not going to get filed until after the election and the results are known. And what the experts say is that the actual winner is not going to be in doubt if we have margins like we did in 2020, where you had, narrow wins by Biden in some swing states, maybe a 1 percentage point or something like that. But that if we get into a scenario where you have a really close election like you did in Florida in 2000, that's where the litigation goes on to steroids. The very minutia of how a county counts ballots or determines whether an absentee ballot where some errors appeared on the return envelope, like whether that ballot counts or not, what the procedures are. That's, in recounts, dozens, maybe hundreds of votes can be changed. But if you have the, close but not nail-bitingly close results, then you probably can't change the results through litigation.
After the break, Patrick and Martine talk through how things could break down between Election Day and January 6, 2025. We'll be right back.
So, Patrick, as you said, this is all going to play out on a really tight deadline. And there are a bunch of deadlines and a bunch of bureaucratic steps that need to be taken. Can you talk through what that process is like in terms of certifying the results and the things that basically have to come after the votes are counted in each state?
Yeah, there's some kind of arcane stuff that happens with elections that none of us really knew before or paid close attention to. I'll
if we're being honest.
Right, that's right. Like, everybody should just openly admit, I never really paid close attention to the canvassing and certification of the votes. And that's because, the election is held on Election Day. That night or a day or two later, the Associated Press and other news outlets are able to tell you, we've been following the vote and this is who won. They always say this is the unofficial result, but the results aren't really official until they are certified. And so in the days and weeks after the election, you have the counties in each state certify their results and send them up to the state. And then the state certifies those results. Then, since we have the Electoral College, the electors meet and they cast their votes, and then that is sent on to Congress for the finalization, the final certification of the results.
Mm-hmm. And so where can things break down in that process?
Well, as we talked about, things can break down on election night, but it's really over the next couple of weeks is when they certify the results at the county and state level, and then by December 11th, the states have to certify their results, and December 17th is when the electors meet. If you're unable to have your electors meet, you're in real trouble at that point. That's a very crucial day because if the electors don't meet, you have some doubts about how the electors are supposed to cast their ballots. You've got real questions heading into January 6th.
But when you say if the electors are unable to meet, what do you mean by that? What could prevent those people from showing up at this meeting on December 17th in the way that they have to do for the election results to move forward?
Well, first of all, to level set, I don't expect that to happen. I expect that the electors would be able to meet. But you could imagine a situation where there would be someone or someones would prevent electors from meeting, that you'd have some sort of disruption of the electors meeting, and that they would physically be unable to get into the state capitol or wherever they're holding their elector meeting.
And as you say, we're not expecting that to happen,
no.
But just to be aware of all the potential things that are, concerns, even if they're remote concerns. So that's December 17th, important day. And then, of course, we get to the day that we are all familiar with, and that is January 6th, which, in addition to being the day when this insurrection happened at the Capitol almost 4 years ago. Like, that's just the day that certification of results happens. Can you talk a little bit about what is supposed to happen on January 6th when people aren't breaking into the Capitol, and like what is going to have to play out on that day for things to move forward?
Yeah, the ordinary process is that the vice president, who is the president of the Senate, presides and opens the electoral ballots that were sent in, reads them off, and the one who has 270 or more electoral votes is determined to be the winner and the next president of the United States. Congress can object to those results. That was sort of a subplot of what was happening on January 6th of 2021, was that there were some Republicans who were trying to dispute the results in some swing states. Now, that they never got enough votes for that to happen. And after the attack on the Capitol, I'd say that the efforts to not count some electoral votes was diminished. But that is the crucial day. January 6th is the day where it is decided as to who is the next president.
I feel fairly confident that there are a number of people who've been thinking about how to make sure the January 6th of 2021 doesn't happen again. Can you talk a little bit about what's different now, or your sense of if there are other safeguards that have been put in place to make sure that January 6th goes smoothly, both in terms of disruptions or attempts by people within the Capitol or members of Congress or what have you to prevent that from going on in a fair, straightforward way, and also when it comes to this concern about violence?
So security is going to be much higher on this coming January 6th than it was last time. I think everybody learned some lessons from January 6th, 2021, and one of them is that they need a lot more security to make sure that a mob isn't able to break into the Capitol. There's also no indication that a large number of people are going to be descending on the Capitol, and, for that to happen last time, there was a call out from the sitting president of the United States and weeks of online mobilization to get people out there. Seemingly that would have to happen again to get any kind of sizable crowd, which would then give the police and the National Guard and everybody even more warning and more ability to prepare for that. But I would say as to any kinds of gatherings or disruptions, whether they happen on Election Day or in the weeks after the election or on January 6th, I think that the people involved in those activities last time have also learned some lessons, and one is to not do things so openly. So, there's a lot of opportunities to have conversations in encrypted chats on Signal or on Telegram that could be happening that we just don't know about. So there's absolutely the possibility that planning is being done that's below the radar. But I've not heard or seen anything suggesting that there's any plans for anything like the last January 6th that we saw.
And Patrick, I just want to go back and clarify one small thing that you said earlier in terms of who is going to be presiding over this certifying of the election results in Congress, that's the vice president. And so this year it's going to be Kamala Harris, which is kind of an interesting moment considering that she is also the Democratic presidential nominee.
That's right. She's going to have to be in this role of, overseeing a very happy or very sad day for herself. And we've seen lots of past vice presidents have had to do this too, right? Al Gore had this big fight over the 2000 election and lost before the Supreme Court over a handful of votes in Florida. And then he had to preside over giving the presidency to George W. Bush.
Well, and as you say, this is just how it's done. It's always the vice president. But I guess I wonder, is that a concern in terms of the appearance of, especially, if Trump were to lose, and if, obviously Trump supporters would be very disappointed by that, if there's a kind of trickiness there in terms of them pointing to this certification of results and saying, well, we can't even trust that because obviously the person who's running for president, who's opposing Trump, she's the one who's saying Trump lost.
The optics could be a little awkward. As the vice president, she does oversee this process. Her role is entirely ceremonial, and we know that from 2020. That was a key problem for Trump as he tried to reverse the results. He was putting pressure on his vice president, Mike Pence, to overturn the results. Pence checked with the attorneys, he checked with constitutional scholars, and he found that he just didn't have that power and he wouldn't go along with Trump. So we know that Kamala Harris, as vice president, can't do anything to change the results. And we do have a history of vice presidents overseeing this when they won the office of president and when they had to oversee their own loss.
So, Patrick, knowing all this, do you have any advice for how voters should prepare themselves for the weeks and months ahead? I will say that I'm just trying to get a lot of sleep. It's how I'm preparing myself.
That's right. I would say it's good to have knowledge. It's also not good to obsess over things. Definitely, have your antenna up as much as you can about misinformation. If you see something online in the weeks before the election or the weeks after that seems like if it, makes you spit out your coffee and makes your eyebrows jump up into your hairline, take a beat, think about it, maybe Google it, see if you can go to a reputable source. Some of these things that are going to be said are not going to be true. Don't get caught up in the moment. Take a breath. And be okay with, not knowing some things. You might go to bed on election night and not know who the winner is. And when you wake up, more information will be available. You might still not know if whoever was ahead when you went to bed is now behind. That doesn't mean something nefarious happened. That just means more results came in and the votes were counted.
Well, Patrick, I wish you luck as you continue to cover this. I'm sure you are going to be writing a heck of a lot up until Election Day and afterward. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you.
Patrick Marley reports on voting and democracy for The Post. He spoke to my co-host, Martine Powers. Before we sign off, I wanted to tell you about a couple of other stories The Post is following, including some exclusive reporting. You may have seen news earlier this week about a fake viral video that smeared Harris's running mate, Tim Walz. It showed a man pretending to be a real former student of Walz and making allegations against him. The video was viewed millions of times on X. Well, The Post now has new reporting that a Russian disinformation network could be behind the video, and it's connected to one of the Kremlin's most prolific propagandists, a former American sheriff named John Mark Dugan. Dugan used to be a deputy sheriff in Palm Beach County, Florida. He also served in the Marines, but in 2016, he fled to Moscow. He's now working directly with Russian military intelligence to circulate misinformation that targets the Harris campaign. This is according to Russian documents obtained by a European intelligence service and reviewed by The Post. And the Environmental Protection Agency finalized a new rule Thursday about lead in homes. It declared any amount of lead dust on floors and windowsills hazardous. Lead paint is present in many U.S. homes, and even low levels of exposure to lead can cause serious developmental delays in children. The EPA's new rule is an aggressive new standard that would trigger extensive cleanups where lead is detected. This is part of a broader push by the Biden administration to crack down on lead exposure. Earlier this month, the administration issued a groundbreaking new rule requiring water utilities to replace lead pipes across the country. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. If you want to show your support for the show, please subscribe to The Washington Post. Not only is it a great way to help us continue to do this work, but now you can get access to Washington Post podcasts ad-free in Apple Podcasts. Subscribe in Apple Podcasts or by following the link in our show notes. Today's show was produced by Peter Bresnan with help from Emma Talkoff. It was mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Monica Campbell with help from Ariel Plotnick. Thanks to Jenna Johnson. I'm Elahe Izadi. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.